Hello and welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben, your regular roundup of all of the films and re-releases hitting screens this week.
I'm Jake.
I'm Reuben.
And this week we'll be talking about Bong Joon-ho's new film Mickey17, starring Batman himself, Robert Pattinson.
Next up, it's One of Them Days, starring Keke Palmer and SZA.
Then Danny Dyer is back from his towering performance on EastEnders in Marching Powder.
And Steven Soderbergh's Erin Brockovich returns for its 25th anniversary.
As always, another call out to all you aspiring filmmakers out there. We'd love to hear from you, watch your stuff, and possibly interview you. All you have to do is email us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben@gmail.com. Send us your stuff and we'll get you down to the studio so we can have a good old chat.
Please make sure that you are following us on our YouTube and Spotify channels. Like, subscribe, share, comment, tell us everything that we got wrong. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. So, first up this week, we are talking about the new film by Bong Joon-ho, who's on a hot streak, having just, of course, won all the Oscars in the land for Parasite. Mickey17 stars Robert Pattinson, Naomi Ackie, Mark Ruffalo, and a whole host of other famous faces in a sci-fi spectacular that also talks about huge, pressing, modern-day issues like colonialism, racism, poverty, and everything else you'd expect from a Bong Joon-ho film. So, Jake, tell me, how did you feel about Mickey17, and have you read the novel Mickey7 on which it's based? Because I haven't, and I feel like I'd have got more out of it, perhaps, if I was aware of the source material.
No, Reuben, famously, I can't read. So, no, I can read. I have not read the book. I'm sure lots of people would say, famously, I'm a terribly slow reader. But yes, this film was really interesting because I had really no strong reaction to it. Well, the film tackles some very interesting sci-fi elements. It's about a colonial ship that's left Earth due to political discourse between the sort of sponsor, benefactor of the trip, played by Mark Ruffalo doing his best Trumpian impression. And it's about how they go through space, you know, like all these classic colonial missions to space. It felt very Starship Troopers. It felt very satire from the get-go. It felt like every single thing was a form of satire until that third act, to be honest. Yes, it's about Robert Pattinson's character who becomes an expendable, which is just basically a printed out human that does very extreme tasks, and in a quite brutal way. In the trailers it's played for laughs, however I think in the actual film, though some are relatively humorous, it is actually played quite serious from the get-go. Now I think that's really interesting. I think, well, sci-fi has gone through a really weird period of life, of existence. I think it's thriving more on television than it is on film, and therefore these big sci-fi concepts that have to deal with morality, that are mirrors to modern society, have somewhat gone to the wayside because they cost too much money and they never make any money. However, I think because of the name recognition of Bong Joon-ho, and especially Robert Pattinson being a very hot actor at the moment, rightly so, to be honest, I very much enjoyed him in the film. He's doing this kind of ridiculous accent, but it's not too far that it becomes egregious.
Do you know who it's based on?
Who?
It's Steve-O.
Steve-O from Jackass, everyone. Really?
No, but that makes sense once you know it, because I knew it before I went in, and I spent the whole film going, oh, yeah, I see it.
Yes, okay. Well, that's quite a clever choice, really, because you're like, oh, well, you know, a man famous for absolutely destroying his body for entertainment is... I sort of see it. I think Robert Pattinson's a really interesting actor, and I think I really enjoyed him in this film. And I enjoyed the sci-fi concepts. To be honest, I loved Mark Ruffalo in this film. I thought he was just ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous. And I like Mark Ruffalo, but usually I think he gives quite a subdued performance in a lot of stuff he does. But this was not that. And to be honest, I love when an actor does something really bold and stupid. But in a good way. Like, I think it works in the context of this greater idea of the film. So I think that actually the first 2/3 of this movie really did work for me. the idea, the sci-fi conceit really works. I liked that it did remind me of niche reference o'clock here, Terrorhawks and Ted Neinstein and his ability to replenish himself via cloning. There you are, Dad. That's a reference for you. I'm always mentioning my mother, but never you, Dad. So there you are. That's one for you. So I think that the first two portions of it, and I generally thought it was going to go a different way, but to be honest, at the end it becomes kind of like a big Roland Emmerich type situation where, yes, it still clings to its links to more morality based storytelling, but it does go in a bit of a grander way, with everyone going a bit larger than life. Again, I think Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette's character, who play husband and wife in this, they have a very good sort of through line of where their characters go. They go from ridiculous but adored to sort of very, very sinister, dark, very dark and bleak, and just moronic and evil in its purest capitalized version of EVIL. Absolutely. So it's interesting because I came out and I was like, yeah, I think I was on the phone to someone. I said, yeah, I think it was good. I think I enjoyed it. But it just sort of, I think it doesn't really land all its punches. I think it looks pretty great, especially the practical sets and the practical sort of world that it presents. You know, Robert Pattinson looks very, both absolutely adorned by half the crew, yet also looks emaciated and gross and moronic. And the bits that are funny, especially in the earlier part of the film, are really quite funny. So I did really like it, but trepidatious. I think in a month I might completely forget I watched this film. So that's a very interesting place to be in, and I'd love to know, Reuben, what if you had a similar experience to me.
So it's interesting because I actually really liked it. I thought it was absolutely great. Like, I think it's a nailed on like 8 out of 10 for me. I had a lot of fun. I laughed all the way through, and I also thought, oh, you know, this is classic Bong. He's got all of these fantastic ideas about how we can talk about stuff that is happening today in 2025, but through the lens of a big, I think, quite crowd-pleasing, although the box office figures wouldn't suggest that's the case, a big crowd-pleasing sci-fi adventure with Robert Pattinson playing multiple versions of himself. And as you say, Mark Ruffalo having the most fun anybody has perhaps ever had on a film set, playing, I would say, a sort of mashup of Trump and Elon Musk. He's got the MAGA hats, he's got the red ties, but he's also got a lot of the kind of like the Musk ideology, shall we say. So I thought he was really great in it. Actually, I have to say, Robert Pattinson, I think he's a really good leading man for this kind of film because he kind of matches its freak, you know, like he is giving a deeply strange performance in a film that is actually also secretly very weird. It kind of looks like a glossy mainstream blockbuster and it kind of fulfills that role. But, you know, this is Bong Joon-ho we're talking about. It's still super strange and I really liked that.
That's the thing, that going into it, the trailers don't even let on how weird it gets and how just bizarre everywhere. Sort of the characters are, it's very removed from our own understanding of what social norms are, because all the characters have a sort of weird attitude to life and just how they portray themselves. They're caricatures of traits in people, I think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that the reason that works is because we've got it in this sci-fi setting where it's already so divorced from reality. But obviously everything is kind of playing into a broader metaphor. But I thought that really worked. It kind of reminded me of Arrival at times because it's basically about colonialism. And similarly to something like Avatar as well. You know, it's about humanity coming to a planet that isn't their own and judging themselves to be its true owners. And, you know, I thought that the film did a really good job actually with a lot of its kind of more thematic and political messaging. I think it really lands some punches, albeit still in a way that is very accessible to a mainstream audience. And I actually disagree with you about the ending. I thought the ending was really great. There's an arc with one of the Mickey duplicates, shall we say, which I found really quite moving actually, and I thought that it really worked itself into a really strong, emotional and also, dare I say, militaristic climax that I found very satisfying. So I really like this. The thing that I find a bit strange about it is I just sort of like it. I think it's really good. I think Bong Joon-ho's done a really good job. I think Robert Pattinson, Naomi Ackie, they're really charming. They're great leads. I found it really fun, really engrossing. I didn't feel the runtime. It is, as you said, it's about 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think. So I enjoyed it. But it's strange to me that after a film like Parasite, which is so very, very quirky and about which I could talk for hours and hours and hours about all of the different layers and different interpretations, this, I'm sort of just happy to say, yeah, it's good. You should go and see it. You'll have a good time. But I don't feel like I have to say much more than that, because it is good. You will enjoy it. It has got a lot to say, but that's sort of it. Like, in the oeuvre, in the filmography of Bong Joon-ho, you know, I wonder how this will look 10 years down the line, as you say. I'm not sure it will age badly, but I don't think that anyone is going to be saying that this is his best film, and I think that's completely fine. But listen, when Parasite exists, nothing will ever beat Parasite.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, because I do think it genuinely was good, and I was enjoying it whilst I watched it. I enjoyed the ride and the world that it did create. But it sort of, I wonder what is missing. Is it something? Was it a problem that is present in the source material, or is it something that was lost in adaptation? That's what I want to do, because there is something that's sort of not there that could sort of really solidify it, and you have to think about those. Well, how did the big sci-fi moral staples succeed? And then I have to go, and then I'm always going back to like the original, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I was like, that's a bit too far back. I'm trying to think of more recent ones, and then that's the problem. The problem comes up in that. What is the great recent successful sci-fi moral tale? And that's a big question.
It depends how you feel about Avatar, but I would say that in many ways it is Avatar.
But see, I think Avatar falls off because it is more about what people go to see Avatar for is the spectacle. But I guess that's in any sci-fi. They go for the spectacle and stay for the social commentary. But I think Avatar's social commentary could be written by a preschooler.
To sum up, basically, it's interesting because neither of us actually have that much to say about this film, other than that we broadly liked it. I think I might go and see it again, because I wonder if I'll sort of find more hidden depths to it maybe than I have this first time around. But I mean, I definitely recommend it. It's good fun.
I agree. I'd recommend it. People should go see it, if not just for Mark Ruffalo, because it is a stellar performance where you're not rolling your eyes, because it does actually go to places that is interesting. And Robert Pattinson, I love that he likes to do weird things. Yeah, it's there. The film exists. Go see it. But as you said, Reuben, the box office results aren't looking very good, which, to be honest, I understand, because as sci-fi fans, you and I are both sci-fi fans, it's sort of no one is watching still to this day, and I'm not sure what is going to be that tentpole that isn't, established like Avatar, that will do well across the foreign markets as well, just because it's more about the spectacle image than just the great moral themes. I even find it, if I do a slight tangent, that modern Star Trek goes a similar sort of way, that you had this series that deals with a lot of moral situations, and that is the core theme of the ethos of the show, and yet modern ways tries to shoe it further towards action, further to more the consumer market, and loses its charm. I think Mickey17 does draw a good line between having fun, having some great performances and some great speeches, as you say, and also having that sort of a lot of action, but also a good moral through line. But still, it's missing some seasoning to me.
I would say it's another hit from the Bong.
Well, that was perfect. I can't beat that. Next, we talk about One of Them Days, starring Keke Palmer and SZA, as they star as two roommates, Drew and Alyssa, as they search for ever-elusive rent money. The clock is ticking, and hijinks ensue on mass quantity. A very stylish film, I thought, Reuben. It's directed by Lawrence Lamont, who is primarily known for music videos. The film definitely had that quality to it, but I thought for the better, because it was very stylish, this film. It was very energetic. It had some really strong and large performances, I thought, definitely for the better of the film. Now, I'd love to know what your opinion was.
Yeah, I agree. I think its best quality is the energy that it has. It has this kind of propulsive vibe to it that reminded me at times of Tangerine, the Sean Baker film from about I think it's 10 years old now. That film. It's basically following these two friends as they trot across LA, encountering various problems, always trying to work out what the right thing to do in their ever increasingly terrible situation. And I thought it was overall pretty good. It's funny. I laughed a decent amount. There's some great stuff in a blood donation clinic, which I thought was the film's high point for me. I thought it was very, very funny. It's got good little cameos in there by people like Lil Ray Howery. I thought that it had enough kind of interesting ideas and enough comedic beats to keep it going. The problem, and I'll come to the problem I have with this film straight away, is that it very, very quickly started to feel like a formula, because basically the setup is the main character Drew, who's the one played by Keke Palmer. She's in this kind of situation where she really wants to kind of get out of the current job she's in. You know, she's working as a waitress, but she really loves it, but she's trying to better herself. And her best friend, who is an artist, this is the character played by SZA, is essentially the comedic foil to her straight man. And the formula that the film then finds is basically the friend will do something really dumb and Drew will have to sort it out. And that basically becomes the structure of the film for the next hour and 10 minutes, something like that. So I just felt like I could see the bones of the story peeking through very often. And that's not a deal breaker, you know, like I still had a good time even with that. But it meant that a lot of the film did feel like padding because the writers couldn't work out how to make the story flow more evenly. But as I said, you know, it kind of gets away with it because it has some decent jokes, it has good performances, and it has this sort of constant energy and this constant kind of rhythm of, okay, next thing, which keeps you just about engaged. So I liked it. It has kind of interesting things to say, you know, about society and about what it means to be a young person living today. You know, these are two out-of-pocket women living in the jungle in LA. And it's interested in looking at that community and the kind of the spirit of that community, even amidst kind of gentrification, which is slowly coming in. So I liked it. I laughed enough. I liked the characters. I thought it had a strong ending as well. But at times, especially given that it's 89 minutes long, I just thought, come on, this is creaky and this could be tighter.
See, I have similar feelings, but with a different outcome. So I believe that you are correct. It is very formulaic, like solidly formulaic. I was sitting there being like, well, this is like a film from the 90s or something, like a comedy film from the 90s. It's so beat. However, to be honest, it felt more like satire again of even that formula. It's like, oh, this is almost hilarious how formulaic, how this person does something too stupid to then lead to it. But then I just loved the scenarios that it ended up in. And really, I loved this film. It felt like an extended sitcom episode, but a sitcom I really liked. I thought that the central two performances were what really guided the film. I thought Keke Palmer, I like as an actress. She was in Nope, which I hated. But again, she was definitely not the worst part of that film by a long country mile. SZA, who obviously is more famous as a musician, was actually also incredibly good. And the two had a really great chemistry. I thought the world was ridiculous in a way that I thought the jokes were stupid enough that it got me by. And every time that there was a new joke that felt a bit like similar to the old, they threw a wrench in it to make it slightly different. Yes, it forms a very strict pattern of typical development, how the low point is very low and it comes at the exact point in the screenplay that it's supposed to. But to be honest, I think the performances are fun enough. I really enjoyed just how stupid it was, how everyone was a bit ridiculous. To be honest, I have such a squeamish approach to blood that when that scene happened, I was, oh, thank God I'm sitting down. But it was funny. It didn't have any need to exist. She would have died if she was given 7 to 8 pints of blood in one day. But to be honest, I think that it exists in that world that is so far removed from reality. I think that just the characters are absolutely beyond there. And to be honest, I thought, I had no expectation going into the film, none whatsoever, and I actually was very pleased. I thought it had a great sort of look. It had that sort of proto-film but sort of music video retro style that is fit in a lot of costume design, which I thought was great. Everyone looked so cool or just so really interesting.
There's a very good bit of costuming which sees the main character Drew have to be able to be dressed in a way that is comedic and inappropriate as long as she's not wearing her jacket. But the second that she's putting on a blazer, she looks like she's ready for a high-powered job interview, which I thought that was a clever bit of costuming. And as you say, I enjoyed a lot of the way that it was shot. I think you can tell the kind of the music video influence there, because it is very stylish. It's shot on these super wide anamorphic lenses, and it looks really cool at times. And there's this kind of recurring motif as well, where the screen will pause and we'll have these huge letters crash in telling us how long, until the deadline, until the rent has to be paid, at which point, it starts getting replaced with things like, 30 minutes until certain death in a way that, felt knowing and naff in a good way. I think that's really the way that I felt about this film. I felt like it was kind of scrappy, but in a way that I enjoyed. I found those elements quite charming, even as it was a little ragged.
See, and I also think that this film has a really interesting place, because I was watching it, and, at this stage of life, none of us has bags of money, and, rent is a real serious sort of issue that you have to deal with. Lots of people are living paycheck to paycheck in this country and in America and across the world. It is that we're in a state of economic instability across the globe. And I thought, well, this deals with it in a very interesting way, because it's very comedic. It's taking a look at it, but it does show the absolute desperation of people in a level of poverty. I thought, well, it's really interesting. A lot of these films do. Mickey17, he decides to become an expendable for twofold. One is that, he has no qualifications. He has no lot in life. These girls are working class or even artists that are trying to make their way in the world but are failing drastically because of the system. They cannot approach the system. The landlord is corrupt. Loaning money causes people to turn into insane Cat Williams performances, and are even effectively the police themselves, the loan service, which is a very funny little bit in the film. And they're not treated seriously because, there's a lot of elements of undercurrents of race and gender as well, but very subtle. It doesn't hit you over the head with its politics like Mickey17 does. They're different types of films, but I think it does deal with it in a very interesting way. And to be honest, I was sitting there being like, yeah, I can sort of feel this, desperate drive to squirm and scrap and scrape to get as much money as possible and then have it taken away from you. I know it happens to be in random situations here, but there's a hilarious moment where there's an accident and the two are being driven in an ambulance, and then Keke Palmer looks up and he said, "This is a $4,000 bill," and they just run out the ambulance. And I was like, well, thank God in this country we have the NHS, God bless. But it just seems, the desperation is something that's really interesting and is captured really well, but in a comedic way that you can watch it, laugh, but also resonate with the struggles of these people and people across the globe. So I thought maybe that's why, maybe I saw myself in both characters. Probably SZA's character slightly more than the determined, very successful in her own right Keke Palmer's character, but the one who makes stupid mistakes and can't hold on to money to save her life. Maybe that's what resonated with me. I'd highly recommend the film. It's a bit of fun. I'm glad it was on the big screen because it does look great. And I think, it was so good to just see a different approach to LA. A lot of LA films, they don't really lean in towards the impoverished side of people's lives. But I was really, really pleased I got to see this movie.
The next film we're going to be talking about this week is the new collaboration by director Nick Love and Danny Dyer. They previously worked together on things like The Football Factory. Now, Danny Dyer plays Jack, who is a middle-aged man. He's got a wife, he's got a son, but his true passions in life are football, fighting, and sniffing cocaine. And at the start of the film, we see him get into a scrap, he gets arrested, and essentially is given 6 weeks to sort his life out, or he'll be sent to jail, and that will be the end, he thinks, of his marriage and his relationship with his son. Now, this film is being billed on tube posters and buses all across London as a rom-com with a kick. And I have to say, I don't think it qualifies as either a rom or a com. There's about 5 jokes in there, I would say, and only 3 of them did I laugh at. So it's not the funniest film in the world. But, Jake, tell me, did you enjoy this? Did you laugh at the 5 jokes? Did you have a good time? And yes, did marching powder get you going?
Well, I think you'll be surprised, Reuben, because no, not at all. There is a phrase that Judi Dench once said in the great film Goldeneye, a misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the late 90s. I changed it there for this film. This film does feel like it's from a different era. An era where these sort of jokes may have been hilarious to the consumer. The sort of early Guy Ritchie era of just, geezers being geezers. But this film to me failed on from the opening. It was just incredibly offensive. And I was like, okay, if that's what it's going for, it's trying to be edgy. But I quite like the conceit of this film. I like redemptive story arcs. I was like, okay, great. Let's see how it goes. Because I'd just seen a film I really liked, and I was like, okay, I have to go see this film, which I wasn't excited for because it didn't seem like my cup of tea. But anyway, I'll give it a shot because I like the core idea. A man, an addict, who then tries to better himself to retain the love of his wife and his son. And that is a great film, except this film does not do anything with it. Danny Dyer's character is irredeemable. Every time he's given a chance, he throws it away. He has a great scene where not as in a better scene, where he's spending time with his son and actually being a good father, but then not even relapses because he's been doing cocaine through the entire film. He just sort of does loads of cocaine, gets really drunk, and makes a fool of himself again. But this is like, the 100th time that he's had to deal with this situation, and his wife's given him the last chance every single time. And you just have to think, well, he doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve any of this because the film has nothing to say about actual drug addiction. It has nothing to say about redemption, and nothing to say about that at all, I don't think, really. It tries. It sort of hits because it is a good conceit. And I think Danny Dyer is a great casting choice for that role because he has that history. It is like a sequel to The Football Factory, but now he's grown up. He needs to grow up. But this film is not grown up. Its humor is in the gutter. Definitely a, go on then, cancel me type humor. It's trying to push the boundaries even more, but not funny. You say there's 5 jokes that worked. I don't really think I saw any of them. I think maybe his wife has some good jokes. I think her character is played okay, but really I don't understand her motivation. Why is she in love with this person? Why does she stay with them through all this? Why doesn't she just leave? She has better options that present themselves in the film, and she doesn't do it. Danny Dyer, even then, when you get through the entire film and you feel like there have been moments where he has tried to get better, not very succinctly done in a cinematic way at all, but then even at the end where he's like, I'm going to become a better person, and then lists off all the straw man arguments about how modern people are terrible and that you've got to be old-fashioned to be a proper man, and then just goes against everything that the film was standing for. I'm just like, well, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? What am I actually getting out of this film? Is it funny enough that this sort of Homer Simpson-esque doesn't change, doesn't learn, floating sort of morality type character works? No, it's not. Is the romance good enough that I believe it exists, that I can latch onto it and understand I actually want those two to be together? No, it does not. I want her to leave him and go off with a different person, take her son away. You don't feel good for him. Even when he does acts of good, it's not actually out of a good intention. It's almost by accident, because he has to look after his brother-in-law who has severe mental ailments and illnesses. But even then, when he looks after him, it's not done sincerely. It's not done altruistically. It's all for an ulterior motive. And, you know, that can start off the character, but then they have to develop into doing something genuinely good for themselves and not self-serving. And this character is completely self-serving, and it's not funny enough to get away with it. It's just an absolute dinosaur movie, a fossil that should have been left deep in the ground. I think it's terrible. I think Danny Dyer does a good job with the material he's given. I think, you know, there's a good bit of self-deprecating humor that's through his voiceover, but then there's just some jokes that just are absolutely old hat, that just ring really, really negative, really sour. But you seem, Reuben, to be resonating a positive opinion about this movie. And if that is true, I don't know what to say. But please, let us know. Reveal, peel back the curtain and tell us what you thought.
So the thing that you said there was he's trying to work out how to be a better man. And I think that's actually what the film is about. It's a film about masculinity, and it's a film about the ways in which, you know, the toxic cycle of masculinity leads men down very, very self-destructive paths. And I don't think that this is a film which is about a romance. I don't think this is a film which is about, you know, comedy and humour. I think that this is a film about the devastating impact that drugs and toxic masculinity can take on men's mental health. I know that that must sound crazy to you, but that's what I got out of this film. I found it devastating. I was actually really moved by this. I think Danny Dyer plays that central role phenomenally well. Because on the surface, he's this geezer, he's this hard man who, you know, just lives for these unbelievably violent conflicts with rival football teams, you know, doing all the drugs they can find, drinking all the booze they can find. But actually, underneath it all, he's in real pain. And the pain that he's in is he doesn't know how to exist in the world without that. Because the addiction isn't just to the substances, although he absolutely is addicted to substances, but he's addicted to the idea of traditional masculinity. He's addicted to that being the only way in which he feels he can have self-worth. The only way in which he can connect and bond with his friends is through the medium of getting super Larry and having a big punch-up. That's the language he has been taught. As a man from the working class in the East End, that has been the way he's been socialised. And the film, I think, is about the damage and the devastating impact that those conditions have on men.
I do agree with you on that point. I do agree that that's why I was kind of like, okay, this film might not be my thing in its comedy. That's why from the very beginning I was like, but I believe in its core belief. I believe that a film should be made like this, that you should be given this opportunity, that it is about masculinity. And there are moments where we see its actual devastating effects on his other friends, sort of too far gone, that they have lost everything. And that's... But I don't think it's hammered home enough. I think that my main problem is the resolution of the film overall, because it undoes a lot of that hard work.
Let's talk about that. Let's say spoilers for the end of the film. At the end of the film, Jack basically is given a chance to restart his life. He doesn't get sent to prison, and we see him walking out of the court, and he gives a speech direct to camera. There's a lot of kind of Fleabag-esque asides in this, where he breaks the fourth wall, he directly addresses the audience, and he says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a new man. I'm going to start taking my mental health seriously, like looking at, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically lists a load of things that we would think of as being, in a word, woke, right? Things that he's going to do to reinvent himself. But all of those things are counter to the kind of role of traditional masculinity that he's been taught and that he's been displaying throughout the film. And so after listing all of these ways he's going to change his life, he says, but that can wait, because now I've got a football punch up to go to. And that's how the film concludes. Do you think that that ending is glamorizing and endorsing his point of view? Because I get the impression you do feel that.
If you're making a story, and this goes to people in life as well, if you are on a redemptive path and you have to redeem yourself in life, you cannot, when you have been given those chances, second chance, third chance, fourth chance, there's probably about 7 chances that he gets in this film. And this final one is a big one because he does defy his probation, he does defy his court-appointed therapy, and he does defy his weekly meets with his probation officer, and he just defies it. But because of a good action that he saves his brother-in-law from a situation that he put his mentally ill brother-in-law in, that he saves him from, it's like he's given a walk free. He's a get out of jail free card. And I was like, no, he's definitely going to jail. But then he goes straight back to do the thing. So it doesn't underline or validate the fact that we actually think he's going to change. Because every time he says, I'm going to change, and there's a little glimmer of hope, he always slips up in the film.
Because he's an addict. Because he's addicted to that lifestyle. Because he's addicted to that brand of masculinity. He doesn't know how to exist any other way.
I can see that in the previous moments in the film where he does have to sort of stumble so that we can get him into a firmer position for this. But the fact that at the very end of the film, he's still in the same position he was in at the very beginning, just with a slight mindset change, I have no belief that this character will actually follow through and the cycle of abuse continues. So it doesn't succeed.
I agree. What a profound and interesting point to put in a Danny Dyer football comedy rom-com.
It's a profound point, but it's not dealt with well, because I actually don't think it understands what it's saying. It doesn't present itself as horrific. The music's triumphant. The whatever song they use going into the credits, very typical geezer music.
Ironic?
I don't think it's ironic, because the humor in it isn't irony. It's just signposting alerts. We're edgy. It's edgy. And so the ending is also edgy. Right, yeah, he's going to change, but he's also going to kick some ass before he does it because he needs revenge. It goes against the complete point. The thing that should have happened was he goes and he goes to see, and we have another profound point at the end. He goes and sees this rebel. He's like, I'm going to be this person, but then takes a second and he's like, actually, no. And he walks away. And then that, to me, would have made the movie more resonant, and it would have made it work, because okay, he has several chances. I'm sure people who struggle or people who are in lives with people who struggle with addiction abuse have to sort of go through so many times. If you love a person, you will do anything to get them back on track, and they do love him. I don't know why, because he doesn't seem to love them very firmly. There are moments. I won't say that it's lost, but there are moments of dedication. I think it could have been played differently or filmed differently, or some of the dialogue changed just to make it a little more interesting. But because of that ending, it just ruins any of the hard work. And I don't even think it's that hard work that they actually put into writing this story. I think it is a great story that could have been done in a comedic way much better. But because of that ending, and because he doesn't redeem himself, and it is presented through a gaze of, nah, he's a cool guy, we should like him.
He's so uncool. The film literally shows us. This is, I think, where we fundamentally differ. Is I don't think that the film endorses his lifestyle, and I was worried that it was going to, but I don't think it does, because it shows. Look at everything that he's lost. He's so unhealthy. He's really out of shape. He's got all of these psychological problems, and they're all because of the fact that from his late teens, early 20s, as just a bit of fun, he started doing coke at parties when he was at university. And I think that therefore the film is saying, it's holding up a mirror to a situation that millions of people are affected by, wherein real people, good people, flawed people who do bad things because of their illness, literally are experiencing every day. And I think that therefore, that character is complicated. He is redeemable, but he's tragic. This is a really impressive performance by Danny Dyer, because it's full of pathos. You hate him and you love him, and that's exactly how his family and friends feel about him, because they recognise that the man that they love, who we do see flashes of, isn't the man that they're so furious with and so hurt by. It's because he's ill. It's because he's an addict.
No, see, I agree on that point. I don't think it glamorizes his life. I think it does do, the way it presents drugs is in a very interesting, fun and engaging way that, and there is a point that you do think that people who go through drug addiction, who talk about it after, it's like, well, they love doing drugs. It's very enjoyable. And I think that does come across. But again, my problem still falls to the conclusion of the film, because I think, yes, it doesn't glamorize. Yes, he loses a lot, but he hasn't lost anything by the end of the film, apart from, what actually is in the text of the film. that what he would lose is his son and his wife.
So he loses everything. So the end of the film is him losing everything. You just said it.
He doesn't lose everything. What does he lose? He's free from jail. He can go back to be with his wife and child. And he's put his child in some very serious positions. You know, they get shot at.
But that act of going back, right? That moment at the end where he says, but actually, forget all that. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, go to a big football fight and do some coke. That is literally, that's the addict being presented with everything, their whole life, everything that they could possibly want, everything, everyone that they love and all the opportunities they could ever have, and still choosing the drug over all of that because they're an addict.
No, I don't. I think that, yes, that's a better film, and that's interesting if it was presented the way, but cinematically, the way it is shot, the way it sounds, the way it is performed, is too cavalier. This is presented as a comedic ending because it's like, oh, I'll do this, but tomorrow I'll do it all next week. Don't worry, because right now I'm still going to be the funny guy you've seen who's made all these fourth wall breaking jokes. And I was like, well, it could have been presented, even if the slightest change in the music was different, or, sort of a slight change of direction for the performance could have made it that sort of irony, or it ended on a different beat. I think it is one of those films that ends in a triumphant freeze frame or something like that. It's definitely one of those types of movies where it's like halfway through or slow motion beating up of a fellow football rival because they're getting revenge.
What better expression of the self-harm that he is performing?
Now, that is good, but I think you're reading into it. I think you're going too deep in between the lines, whereas the film can be clever. I believe as I've said many times, the actual story and what it's trying to achieve, what really infuriates me, I think the jokes are outdated, definitely.
Deliberately so, I think, most of the time. You mentioned that it's offensive from the off. I think that the language that the film uses is in a bid to be authentic to how that generation speak. And I think that the film isn't endorsing that attitude.
Well, see, this is the thing, that I'm on that line of where I'm like, what does it actually want to say? Because what it is trying to say and what you're reading from it, Reuben, is interesting and is a good film idea. But because of it being through the eyes, we don't get enough. I don't think that the wife is hurt enough by the situation that is presented. Her son almost dies. Almost gets killed and doesn't know, and there's a very small bit of good acting from him when that happens, and you see him thinking, okay, now it's enough. Again, the ending is the big problem, because I think Danny Dyer gives a performance. I don't think any of the other performances are necessarily very good, but I don't think when you're watching this in the general public, you'll be thinking, oh yeah, now his life's going to be ruined or whatever, because he gives this sort of bravado situation. It's too enjoyable. It should have ended differently. Whether it ends the same but they change either the music or the dialogue or something to actually denote what you read from it, to give it a bit more of a clear edge, because I think it's too murky. I think it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to tell a compelling story but also try and be the cool 90s-esque film, that Football Factory, have that same energy, have the same Guy Ritchie energy. But it's like, therefore, if it's authentic and it wants to tell this authentic message, it has to have a bit more resonance at the end, where it can be seen as a gut-wrenching blow, not just we have to have this deep debate to actually see whether it was actually accurate on that.
I do think that that's fair. I think that the ending is confusing. But then, sort of, as the credits rolled, to me, it sort of settled, and I felt like, okay, I see what they're going for. The thing is the film undeniably wants to have its cake and eat it. I mean, I feel I've really come to the defense of Marching Powder, and that's because I do think it's a good film, and I think that Danny Dyer is genuinely, completely tremendous. I think he makes a really, really complicated, multifaceted, pathetic, hurt, lovable, frustrating character from this screenplay.
I come around to you on that. I think Danny Dyer does give an interesting performance, and I think if it was presented slightly differently in the other filmmaking, it would really sing, because you could have the same exact character, but you put it in a slightly different movie, and everything that you saw from it comes out even more. And I think you are right. It is a great performance from him, probably the best performance I've seen him do. It
is confusing at times. And I think to a certain extent the film takes a very non-judgmental approach to the lifestyle that Jack leads. consumption of drugs is presented in quite a matter-of-fact way. I don't think that the film is criticising that. And actually, I think that's, to me, that makes a lot of sense. It's not saying that he's a bad person for doing drugs, because I don't think that you are a bad person for using drugs. But the film also, to a certain extent, as a result of the fact it's not demonising substance use, sometimes you think, well, is it endorsing it? And I think that applies to its representation of violence as well, which is kind of valorised and glorified. But at the same time, like the drugs, we see the devastating impact of the drugs. We see the devastating impact on violence. The fights in this are horrible. The fights in this are absolutely brutal. And I was really impressed by the filmmaking, actually. You know, they're shot in this kind of very close, sort of shaky, boots on the ground, almost documentarian approach at times, which I found it genuinely threatening and frightening. And all of that stuff, I think, feeds into the film's confused tone, perhaps, because it does very much want to have these very serious scenes where people are getting seriously injured and at times life-threateningly injured. And then it also wants to crack pretty bad dad jokes all the way through. So I don't want to say that, you know, the film is without its flaws, but to me, at its heart, it is a story about a man who wanted so much more from his life and wants to get his life back, but he is so addicted to substances and also to the lifestyle and the friendship and the bravado and the sense of self-worth that it gives him, because he is having a crisis of masculinity. And that, for me, is where everything kind of crystallises. It is a film about being a man. And it's a film about being a working class man in many ways. You know, we haven't touched on the class elements. There's a lot about class in this, not least because cocaine, historically, you know, we've thought of it as being something that is, you know, consumed by LA bankers in the 80s. And now it's absolutely everywhere. You know, people in the service industry are doing it. People in the film industry are doing it because, you know, they're working really punishing hours and they're earning no money. So I really like the way that the film is engaging with all of these topics. It's not necessarily doing it in a way that is particularly subtle. And it's also, at times, I think, doing it in a way that is a little bit tonally confused. But I'm glad that it's doing that. I'm glad that it's having those conversations. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I found it engaging and moving and thought-provoking. What it didn't do was make me laugh very much, and it certainly ain't a rom-com.
I think it is very interesting. I think people, I don't want to say it because I didn't like the film, but maybe do go see it to see if you have the same thoughts, because beneath it is a very interesting film. I think it has a lot to say. It is a sort of legacy sequel to the films of the 90s that sort of evoked this, you know, Romper Stomper, all this sort of football hooliganism films. It fails on certain things because it's so subtle in how it presents its severe naturalistic scenes, and yet really over the top when it presents its violence and its drug use. And therefore it's, I think, slightly out of balance. But people should go see it. If you have to be over 18, because it is uses very foul language and uses extraneous drug use. But are you going to be like Reuben and marching to the cinema, or is it something not to sniff at? Now we take a look back at Steven Soderbergh's runaway success, Erin Brockovich, as it has its 25th anniversary. The film stars, of course, Julia Roberts and Albert Finney, as it takes on the true story of Erin Brockovich and the case against PG&E Water Corporation and the poisoning of the local water in Hinckley. Now, we are looking back at this film. An absolutely staggering amount of money at the box office. It also was nominated for 5 awards at the Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actress, yada yada yada, and of course one for Julia Roberts. She gives an absolutely fabulous performance in this film. I'd never seen this film before, and I sort of was taken aback by just how enjoyable it was to watch. And of course it's a very severe case. It deals with morality, deals again with poverty, and how someone can rise above the position that they seem to be destined with to better other people's lives. Now, Reuben, you were saying before we rolled the cameras that this is quite a comforting movie to you.
Yeah, I know that sounds absolutely insane, that a film about a true life mass poisoning by a giant industrial corporation could be a comfort film, but this genuinely is. I've watched this a lot of times. It had been a little while, so I revisited it, and I was just really struck by, I've actually seen this so many times that I know a lot of the script by heart. And I think that's because, even though it is a film about a very serious real story in which many, many people's lives were incredibly seriously impacted by very, very irresponsible and criminal behaviour, it also, at its heart, is a love story. This is sort of a buddy comedy between Julia Roberts' character, Erin Brockovich, who is a real woman who I find very inspiring in day-to-day life, and Ed Masry, who runs the legal firm who takes on the case. And for me, I just think that this is a really brilliant way to tell the story. It's written by Susanna Grant, who I think she just had the same massage therapist as Erin Brockovich, and the therapist put them in touch and they had coffee, and then Susanna Grant was like, I want to tell your story for the screen. And so I think that what Susanna Grant did a brilliant job of is looking at this very, very serious, very, very, at times, bleak and upsetting story, and realising that actually the way to tell it was as a platonic love story between Erin and Ed. And I think the performances really, really sell that. There's such an abundance of kind of hilarious little playful teasing between the characters. But the film is a real testament, I think, to the way in which people can actually make a huge difference to their community. If we actually take a stand, if we're brave enough to take a stand, we can affect real change. And I find that genuinely very inspiring. Erin Brockovich, I think, is such a brilliant character in that way, because despite the fact that she has no legal background, she doesn't have a kind of legal education, and she's got absolutely no money, she's stony broke when we meet her, she knows that the right thing to do is to help these people, and that's what drives her. And that gives her a connection, because she's not a lawyer, she's not speaking to them in legalese, she's not treating them like numbers on a list of people that she has to get through. She's talking to them as human beings. She's forging that human connection. And so I just think it's a brilliant film, honestly. I completely love it. I think it might be one of my favourite films, because I enjoy watching it, and I'm also inspired by it. And that's such a potent combination. And I adore Julia Roberts in that role. I adore Albert Finney. I think the balance between curmudgeonly and kind of twinkly is expertly navigated by him, and they are genuinely such a joy to see on screen. So I just love it, and I find it such an important film because it talks about the way in which communities are essentially gaslit by companies who think that they have so much money they can do whatever they want. And it's so important to stand up to that. We see it in another, I think, unbelievably brilliant film, Todd Haynes' movie Dark Waters, which came out about 5 years ago, I think, starred Mark Ruffalo. That is an unbelievably great film. You should absolutely watch it. It covers a similar topic. And literally last week on Netflix, we have Toxic Town, which talks about, in the UK, the Corby poisonings, where industrial waste was moved in a very irresponsible manner through domestic areas and had a huge detrimental impact on the population living there. So I think these stories are really important. It's still happening. It's happening around the world, where companies are not taking all of the right precautions, and they think that they are above the law essentially because they have so much money. This is a really important film, but it's also a really lovely story about two people platonically falling in love. So that's my gush over. I love this film. I think it might be perfect. I adore Thomas Newman's score, and the first 5 minutes has one of the best car crashes in cinema that is made all the more brilliant by the fact that you see in one shot Julia Roberts get in the car, so you know that it isn't a stunt double.
Unlike you, Reuben, I had not seen it before. I'd heard a lot about it. It's a very well-known film. I think what is really expert from a cinematic point of view, of course, the script is incredibly tight. Soderbergh, we had a joke that he's a great working director. He does everything and anything in every different which way, and that's what he doesn't have a distinctive style. That in his way is a style on its own, because this is very different from Presence, which we talked about previously, and it looks very different from what the film we're going to talk about next week, which is Black Bag, which is also Soderbergh, and so many different facets. And I think that's such an interesting thing, because the filmmaking emulates the characters in itself. When it begins, it's down and dirty and it's sort of very handheld. The sort of stock film that is used is graded to a sort of warm orange to sort of emulate the same sort of desert vibes that is a common occurrence, and just sort of the barren idea that though the film is about water, you have this very warm, almost dehydrated look to it, because it is so, everyone's sort of sweaty and hot, and yet because the water is toxic, you don't have a great presence of sort of blues or any of those colours, which I think is a very subtle but effective choice. I also think Julia Roberts gives a masterful performance. In this film, she's dirt broke and she can't look after herself. She has to put her children first, and yet she pulls it off. She is very down to earth, and it's hard to think that someone as powerful and famous as Julia Roberts, who'd already done Notting Hill and great movies by this point, is giving this really of the dirt performance. And I think it's masterful, and I would keep watching her. I think, she is, like, the film itself, great script, great direction, great music, great premise alone, even though it's real life, but the way it's presented, as you said, Reuben, the way that it actually deals with such a serious event. What I don't think Marching Powder did was try and balance severity with comedy. Like, this does a really decent job at it, because it is such a dark and depressing moment. There's beautiful moments where Julia Roberts is just coming to terms with the fact that a child has contracted cancer because of the neglect of this powerful corporation. And she has to keep a good face because she has to be positive. But you see the cogs whirring. It's a brilliant piece of acting, of just thinking through the situation and really emotionally believing it, and it's a very believable performance. And I think in the script there are a few things that are done to sort of accentuate how desperate and how necessary her position is. She doesn't get to see her kids. The Aaron Eckhart's performance, effortlessly cool and charming as he always is, but also sort of love and family are put to the wayside because she has to put people's lives, other people's lives first. And she is presented as not selfish in the beginning, but sort of she has to do everything for her own family. And then it even transcends that, because getting a better life for her family also means getting compensation and retribution for the people who have suffered. And I think Albert Finney is effortlessly enjoyable as well. As you say, he gives a very twinkly performance, but also, he's not the brevity, he's not the emotional brevity for it, because he is a cold lawyer, but he's likable enough that we're not cold enough to him. And there's a few comedic moments where there are incredibly cold, praying mantis-like lawyers that can't understand human behaviour, which is a bit on the nose.
No, but that scene has the film's best line, in my opinion. Which, I mean, and Erin gets a lot of absolutely killer dialogue, but my favourite line from this film is she says to the cold and aloof female lawyer who's coming, she says, "That's all you've got, lady. 2 wrong feet and ugly shoes." And it's such a burn. I completely love it. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's this great juxtaposition between her humanity and the legal profession at large. But I think that's what the film does so smartly. It avoids it becoming a courtroom drama because it is fundamentally interested in the human experience.
Yeah, we don't even see the eventual arbitration that happens, and I think that's such a masterful move. We just see the aftermath, and there's only a bit of lawyering, and really, you're right. We just do we do what people often don't do in this, and actually feel the human impact, genuinely feel it, like the pain, and like just great performances from all the side characters as well. All the small little bit parts are done expertly well. So what more is to say about Erin Brockovich? It's a great film. I'm glad it got re-released in the cinemas. As I said, it made a lot of money, and it was an awards darling for Julia Roberts. And so yeah, check it out it's on Amazon Prime, so you can watch it there. Yeah, absolutely great. I'm glad I got to watch it for Cinema Spotlight.
So Jake, that brings us to the end of another episode of Cinema Spotlight. But before we go, tell me, what was your film of the week?
I really loved One of Them Days. I thought that was such a surprise little hit for me. I know it didn't ring so much with you, Reuben, but I thought that actually the absurdity of it really just was something I needed that day. It's a beautifully colourful film. I think Mickey17 is good, but it's quite grey. I'd say if you could catch Erin Brockovich at the cinema, I'd say watch that film again. But of the new films, I would definitely say One of Them Days, because it was such a surprise, and I just loved watching the two leads. And I thought, well, Keke Palmer's already on a stratospheric rise, quite rightly, and SZA did an absolutely brilliant job too, and I absolutely adored it. What about you, my friend?
The thing is, there can't be a film this week that I recommend that isn't Mickey17, because I absolutely love Bong Joon-ho. I think he's a genius. And while I didn't think this was on the same level as Parasite, what is on the same level of Parasite? I think that film is absolutely extraordinary and so unique. So Mickey17, you should go and see it. It's good, it's funny, it's exciting, it's really good entertainment, and it also has a lot on its mind. And, Mark Ruffalo performance is worth the price of admission alone, in my opinion.
One of the best of the year so far, I think.
One of the best performances of the year, and you know what? I this film isn't going to get Oscar recognition, but I would actually love it if he got a Best Supporting nod like he did for Poor Things, because I think both those performances are a similar level of unhinged.
And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Cinema Spotlight. Thank you so much again for joining us.
It's been absolutely lovely having you, and indeed, Jake, to chat with you as ever. Tell me, what are we watching next week?
Next week on the roster is Steven Soderbergh's new film Black Bag, Last Breath, In the Lost Lands, and Ni Ja 2.
Fantastic. I look forward to speaking to you then.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.